It's go time.
Welcome to Quick Kicks here on Third Down Gamble with your hosts, Don Charbin and Heath Graham.
CFL right now has certainly been a fun first few weeks, but to some people, don't know why, they just want to sit back and take shots at it. And this latest round came from Luke Willson, the newest addition to the CFL on TSN coverage team, who went on a tweet rampage, if you want to call that, talking about the game that we'll get to later, Saskatchewan at Toronto, and called most of it hot garbage. Why would you, as the person covering the game and basically getting your income from covering this game, at least on that night, are you attacking it?
We did talk a little bit about Luke Willson last week in his addition to the Friday Night Football team. He's unfiltered, which in some ways can be very refreshing and in other ways can be a bit discouraging for the fans of this game. He's got some hot takes, and you don't have to agree with everything he says. You don't have to argue with everything he says. You just have to take what he says with a grain of salt. My thoughts on this game itself, the one thing that he was not wrong about was the number of penalties and how that killed the momentum of the game. There was no flow to that. Just about every play, every second play had a flag, and there was no kind of momentum built when that was going on. He also spoke out against the Rouge, which we have debated to death, and the majority of fans seem to be in favor of. I know I am. I know you are as well. He talked a lot about the timing of the last 3 minutes compared to the NFL is night and day a better product. So I think he'll find his groove. He's still trying to get his feet under him, but one thing's for sure, it has people talking about the CFL and about the TSN coverage.
He did bring attention to it, and for that he needs some credit. In the same breath, and especially when you're getting so upset over the Rouge, and I don't understand what the uptight is about this. 2 games last year were decided by it. That's 2 out of 81 of all games that were decided by that single point on the last play. Now, the point could be picked up earlier in the game, and maybe that does influence outcomes. Fine. But really, that's your number one talking point for him and maybe even a lot of other people. What about Del Duncan Busby's low block on Kenneth George? That chop block has maybe ended the season for George. Nobody on Twitter is going off on that. And that to me is a bigger concern than the Rouge. The penalties in the game, 29, yes. Certainly there was a lot of anger, anguish, whatever, frustration. The Argos 2 losses, the Riders 2 wins. It's sort of like the mono of the big boy and the new big boy. They want to control that sandbox, as it were. The game itself did have problems with flow. You put that last 3 minutes up against anything, and I'll tell you that most people would just go wild to see that over and over.
I guess one of the points that Luke Willson was making is that the first 57 minutes were nothing to write home about. And people are hanging those last 3 minutes up, saying that this was a classic game and very exciting. So kudos to those that sat through the ugliness, but it was a very exciting finish. This is what the CFL is known for, is that excitement in the last 3 minutes. We see multiple possessions by both teams in that last post 3 minute warning run to the finish. And this game delivered. It had Toronto pushing for a comeback, and then a big dagger with the Mario Alford return at the end. It was an exciting finish. And I think that does maybe polish this whole game up a little bit more in people's minds. I understand where he was coming from talking about the first part of the game, but you have to take it as a whole. And for your entertainment value, that last 3 minutes delivered.
Let's look up all the way back to Milt Steagle's 100-yard reception on the final play of that game in Edmonton. That game was a defensive game through and through. And it was only that play where Kevin Glenn finds Milt Steagle 2 Edmonton players collide and Steagle goes 100 yards on the final play to win that game, that game becomes a classic. That's the way sport is. It's rare that you have 60 minutes, 9 innings, 90 minutes in soccer that is absolute classic. Players tire out, mistakes happen, whatever the case may be. To call that first 57 hot garbage, you're out of line. I don't care. I'll take the hit for this if I have to. I am disgusted by that commentary, especially by a guy who's standing on the sidelines. This is not the NFL. So get your head out of the NFL and recognize that this is the CFL. The game is played differently here. The field wider, longer. There's 12 on the field. We have single points. All these differences. Quit trying to make it American. Enough already. I'm sick of it.
The other thing he criticized was the amount of quarterback sneaks in this game, saying that there was 12 of them. Quarterback sneaks serve a purpose. They move the chains. They keep a drive going. The Philadelphia Eagles, if you want to compare it to the NFL, are famous for their quarterback sneak play to the point where the NFL is looking to change the rules. The Saskatchewan Roughriders picked up the current best and maybe best of all time at the short yardage plays. We saw Tommy Stevens bust through for a 19-yard run on a quarterback sneak. Is he trying to say that that wasn't an exciting play? I know on paper, seeing the rushing yards for the third string quarterback coming in on short yardage, maybe not the most exciting thing, but what it does is it keeps that drive going. It gives them a fresh set of downs so they can make more plays.
I wish they would hand the ball off more often, especially around the goal line. I think it would just be more effective than quarterback sneaks. And we saw quarterbacks get pushed back too many times with attempts that failed. And the BC Lions found that out the hard way as well. The game itself, yes, the objectionable conduct's far too many. It's also a hot night. Guys are getting tired, and maybe their fuses are getting shorter as well. Then he complains about the last 3 minutes and the way the Argos sort of sideline to sideline just sort of short passed it down the field to get that tying touchdown. And your point is, what were they supposed to do? Throw it over the top and hope? I don't get it. What are you asking them to do? Because the Riders were not allowing them to do much else. So they figured something out and they used it against the Riders, got down the field. And then Dejan Brissett has to make a fantastic, almost unbelievable 2-point convert catch to tie the game. What was wrong with any of that? Seriously, just quit chirping and try to do something that benefits.
You mentioned some short fuses, and let's circle back here to that Dale Duncan Busby hit on Kenneth George. That, in my opinion, is a play that does not belong in football. It's one thing to block a guy low. It's another thing to dive at the knees, and that's what I feel Duncan Busby did on that particular play, is he came in flying towards those knees, not just taking the man out. I can understand the frustration of the Toronto Argonauts. They lost a good player probably for the season based on the looks of that injury. Rightfully so, they were upset.
The Argonauts were upset to the point that within about maybe 10 minutes of playing time, Jordan Williams comes through and just does a massive two-hander to Trevor Harris and knocks him flying. He's flagged on the play for 15. Well, and Harris now, we discover, has got a concussion from that play. So he's been held out of Roughriders practice. That could change the dynamic going in against BC on the weekend. Now, the Busby thing, what stunned me even more, that was a 10-yard foul? You've got to be kidding me. The rule book missed that, or somebody in the replay booth missed that. Something went horribly wrong in that interpretation. When a guy's knee buckles backwards like that, Busby has no business being there. I'm not saying Busby's dirty. He just did something really wrong. But that has to be out of the game. I don't care if it's in the box, outside the box, in the parking lot, or 40 rows up. It doesn't matter. Get the chop block out of football.
The most frustrating part about that whole situation is that the booth had ample time to review it. Kenneth George was down on the field waiting for the cart. It was a good close to 10 minutes before they got him off the field. It allowed them to look at that play from all angles, and the best they came up with was a 10-yard unnecessary roughness penalty. I agree with you. That's got to stop. You want to tout player safety? Here's an opportunity to make an example.
You want to improve the game, and let's do it too for that reason. The only way that this game improves is if your better players are always playing. And when that sort of thing happens and takes a good player out of the game, that is just not right. And for the CFL, the NFL, that has to change. The UFL, whatever pro league you are, get rid of chop blocks. You don't need them for any reason whatsoever. You're just ruining guys' knees and careers. And that to me is unconscionable. That's a real issue. That's something that we can discuss and go back and forth on and say that has merit. Single points, dink and dunk passing to go tie the game. No, that doesn't. That's low order issue. High order issue, player health and safety. You keep your stars out there. You keep the good players out there. This game gets better. You take them out of the game, quarterbacks, running backs, defensive players, whatever the case may be, then you start to see this game sort of slide backwards.
The Calgary Stampeders have signed linebacker Adam Bighill to the practice roster. Bighill's coming off of a couple of tough seasons in Winnipeg where he suffered some leg injuries. It looks like he's going to get the opportunity to go out on his own terms. I think this is a great signing by the Stampeders.
I kind of thought about this. I think we even discussed it at one point. Where could he land? And I thought Calgary would be a logical spot just because of the turnover that they've had at linebacker. Adam Bighill, he'll be ready to go. What he needs to do is learn the defense. He doesn't know their play calling system. They've got to train him up in that sense. And then he has to know positionally where he has to be. The Stampeders, with a big injury to middle linebacker Markel Lee in the game against Toronto, again, a leg injury. He is out for 6 and maybe more weeks. That really opens the door for Adam Bighill to become that middle linebacker the Stampeders need. And the thing about Adam Bighill that we know, he is like a second coach out there.
He is. And like I said, this is his opportunity to close out the career the way he wants to. I can completely understand Winnipeg's choice to move on from Adam Bighill this past offseason with the breakout season of Tony Jones kind of taking over that middle linebacker spot. And of course, the price tag, you're looking at cap management and how to fit everybody in. It was sad to see him leave his tenure in Winnipeg because he really fit in well with that Blue Bombers defense. This is his chance to prove that he's got something left. Really, it's low risk right now for the Calgary Stampeders. They've only signed him to the practice roster. They're evaluating how he's rehabbed from his leg injury and if he's ready to go. He believes he is. Obviously, the Stampeders see some value in adding him into the mix.
Calgary, I think their defense is pretty strong, surprisingly so, at least the beginning of the season. Adding Bighill isn't going to hurt. Speaking of temper tantrums, Willie Jefferson gets tossed from the game in BC, and this is about a minute to go. Willie gets into it with BC's offensive lineman, Corey Woodruff. They were in a sort of a scuffle when they were right down by the goal line, and suddenly it got worse and worse. And for Willie Jefferson, the reason why he got kicked out, it wasn't so much that moment dictated terms. It was the fact that he got his second objectionable. And when you have 2 of them, you're tossed.
Exactly. And his first one was for essentially taunting the BC Lions bench, an unsportsmanlike penalty, if you will. This one, there was a bit of a tussle. Corey Woodruff claims he was coming in defense of one of his teammates, that Willie Jefferson had done something dirty to one of his players and he had stepped in to defend him. Willie Jefferson claims that somebody went low on him and he was retaliating. This is a 3 sides to this story, and we're never going to find out what the one down the middle truly is because they both have very strong opinions on what happened. The biggest concern is Corey Woodruff was also tossed for physical abuse of an official. In this scrum, he got involved with James Vaughters trying to break up the scrum, try to play peacemaker. And in the ensuing chaos, Woodruff pushed Vaughters' arms and struck the head of the official. So I don't imagine this is going to go unpunished. I believe there will be a fine coming Woodruff's way for this action.
For Kyle McCulloch, who was the person who was hit in the back of the head, he went down right away. It is stated by Woodruff that he was not intending to strike him. It was the fact that Vaughters had got his arm in the way and it bounced sideways as a result of Vaughters' interference to try to break these other 2 up. It was an unfortunate circumstance, but you are responsible for what you do out there. And even sometimes a slightly inadvertent act is going to catch up to you. He will by virtue of being tossed, he's going to be getting a fine anyway. And I think the max that can go is a half a paycheck when you're tossed from a football game. Willie Jefferson's going to be down some pocket money as well for doing what he did. You just saw so much intensity and anger and feel. Now, granted, it was a back-to-back with Winnipeg and BC, but this kind of feel going around. It's like there's a lot of temper floating around.
I think this was a symptom of playing in back-to-back weeks as well. So they don't see each other until a potential playoff meeting for the rest of the season. They've got some time to cool off if they are to meet again.
Part of the reason, remember, I talked about this last week, why I don't like the back-to-backs, because other elements come into play that if you played BC in week 4 and played them in week 12, granted, injuries could impact that, but you don't have this turnaround stuff that it's going to impact you for 2 weeks in a row. Oh, and it happens to be the same team. That part of it, I don't like. I would prefer that all of this back-to-back stuff be eliminated. If you want the Banjo Bowl, put it on Thanksgiving weekend. If you want the Edmonton return match against the Stampeders, same sort of thing. Put it on Thanksgiving weekend. Make Thanksgiving weekend, which is your drive to the playoffs. You're getting down to the last few weeks. Make that a focal point and really push it, because you do have that Monday to play with.
Keeping with the temper tantrum theme, Ryan Dinwiddie, head coach of the Toronto Argonauts, had some pretty strong words for his team and their performance on Friday night, threatening that heads were going to roll. As of this recording, there aren't any announced cuts to the Argonauts roster, but is some change forthcoming?
The Argonauts have already signed former Elks defensive lineman Jamin Pelly. Just as a little tidbit, I bet you a lot of people didn't notice this. The Roughriders started, or at least rostered, 9 defensive linemen in the game against Toronto. And this is a trend that's been going on and on and on. You wonder why offensive lines don't look as good anymore. Well, if you've got 9 defensive linemen rotating in and out, they're going to be far more fresh than you are at the end of the game. And I think if you want to change the game and improve the offense, there's one rule you can look at, is that you can only dress maybe 6 defensive linemen.
That's all that Winnipeg dressed in this last game, and their defense still looked pretty solid too. So it's a difference in how the defensive coordinators choose to call their schemes. And we know Winnipeg often only rushes 3. So it's easier to rotate 6 men on a 3-man front than it is on a 4-man front.
Now for Dinwiddie, he was really angry in that post-game press conference, which I've never seen him that just ready to take somebody apart. And one of the things he made mention of was the fact that there were players out there that he felt were just not doing the work in the offseason to be ready for the season. And that was really frustrating him. Dinwiddie's not used to losing with this football team. In fact, he wasn't used to losing with the Calgary Stampeders when he coached there. This is new territory to go 0 and anything for him, and now 0-3. And for those that are watching for the worst start after a Grey Cup championship, you have to go all the way back to 1950 when the Montreal Alouettes, the Grey Cup champions in 1949, started the 1950 season at 0-4. This is now approaching that territory. For the Argonauts, it's huge that they get this turned around. You know they've got the coaching staff to do it, but it's really frustrating when you're Dinwiddie and you see a Grey Cup champion come out like this. Granted, they put up a fight in the fourth quarter and they got all the way back. They almost got back against the Calgary Stampeders, but you can't wait 30 to 40 minutes before you start trying to figure out how to win.
This is the first time that the Argonauts have suffered a 3-game losing streak anywhere in the season under Coach Dinwiddie's tenure. So this has to be frustrating for him. Yes, they showed a lot of fight in coming all the way back, but there was a cardinal sin on that final kickoff in which they only had 11 players on the field instead of 12. So a mental mistake somewhere along the way cost them after a miraculous comeback.
Jack Cassar is normally the guy that's out there on special teams, but he was injured, did not dress for that game, and maybe the substitute, getting excited over what just happened on the field, forgot that he was supposed to go back out on kickoff cover. Those things happen. That's what makes football so great. In fact, it happened in the Grey Cup. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers on one of the touchdowns for the Argonauts only had 11 defenders out there. These things happen.
They do, and you see the results on the field of what happens when you make these mistakes, whether it's an extra man or one too few. There are consequences, and special teams coordinators, everybody involved needs to make sure they've got that right count. The Argos still had a timeout. They needed to recognize what was happening and stop it to get their manpower on. Now, it is fast moving. Mistakes do happen, but they need to clean that up.
I won't argue what you're saying is right. Think about the situation. You've just tied the game. The crowd is going nuts. There's all kinds of excitement along the sideline. And you're just expecting your cover team to go out there, kick the kickoff, stop the Roughriders, wind out the clock, and we're going to overtime. Nobody's really worried that they're not going to have 11 out there. Players are just in the moment. They're not necessarily stepping back and going, oh, do we have enough? Are we too many?
Hey, it's Dave Thomas, voice of your Saskatchewan Roughriders, and you're listening to the Third Down Gamble podcast.
Week 3 kicked off with the Edmonton Elks home opener taking on the Montreal Alouettes. Montreal came out victorious 38-28 in this one with a late push and 22 points by the Edmonton Elks in the fourth quarter. A little bit of too little, too late for the Elks.
It was, and one of the things that you needed from the Elks was a faster start. Now, they were down 24-6 by halftime. That isn't going to help you win many football games. We were talking about the Argos and their slow starts. Well, same thing with the Elks. Less than 50 yards passing for Trey Ford in the first half of that football game. Any kind of way that you can get that offense moving in the early part of the game, it's going to help you because it's just going to keep you in the conversation as you go forward. Where if you're not doing anything that's successful, I don't think Jordan Misimic is the problem here. I just think that the Elks, part from chemistry, they still are figuring each other out, and also partly from Trey Ford learning the position a little bit more. He's just not a pocket passer, and part of the game is you have to be a pocket passer.
Speaking of quarterbacks and learning the game, Davis Alexander seems to be a quick study. He had the near perfect first half, going 20 for 24 in this game with 3 touchdowns before pulling up with a hamstring injury in the third quarter. Tyler Sneed may still be looking around to see if there's any defenders coming to cover him at all. The late first half touchdown, he was as wide open as I've ever seen a receiver.
He was, and I loved his comment at halftime. He was saying that I'm such a short guy. The only way they notice me is if I jump and wave my arms. There was a bust in coverage. He went down the field and he was literally by himself. And the scariest part of that equation for him is catching the ball. Because if you drop it, you just blown an easy touchdown. Give credit to Davis Alexander. He rolled to his left and had to find him. He had to look up the field and actually see that he'd broken clear. And yeah, Davis Alexander just had a fantastic game. Now, this hamstring injury that he pulled up with, it's something that's been nagging him since training camp. It's not anything too serious. The Alouettes were being precautionary. McLeod Bethel-Thompson gets his first taste, ironically, coming back to Edmonton to play football. 6 out of 8 for 77 yards. He didn't do anything wrong. But Trey Ford, 27 of 36 for 308. Great stats night, but an interception and 2 touchdowns. But again, the Elks got behind so big to the Alouettes early. When you're down 24-6 at halftime, that's a long way to come back. It can be done, but you don't really want to have to do it.
It was impressive to see Trey Ford go over 300 yards, but as you mentioned, they were so far behind that a lot of that came late in the game where the Alouettes still had a pretty comfortable lead. He chipped away. He did what he needed to do in getting some points on the board late. The learning curve continues for Trey Ford. I was lucky enough to be in attendance at this game as well, and I just want to give a shout out to the Elks fans that welcomed me with open arms. The tailgate was fantastic. They had lots of pregame activities outside the stadium as well. It was a bit of a smaller crowd, 14,389, but they are a dedicated core of fans. And if anybody gets the opportunity, I highly recommend attending a game at Commonwealth.
It is a great stadium. Now, the sad thing for Edmonton was it was their lowest attended home game since September 29th of 1971. And it was the lowest attended home opener since 1969. Just over 14,000 were in attendance. That stadium that holds around 50 to 55, that looks fairly empty. And that is a hangover from the Elks not doing well, especially with the Chris Jones era that went sideways. Again, another slow start to the season. People are a little bit hesitant to really go all in on this team when, even with Trey Ford out there, they just don't trust that the package is ready yet.
It's a new regime, and I think that they are building in the right direction, from President Chris Morris on down to Ed Hervey as the general manager, to Mark Killam, the head coach. We've talked about this in the past where teams are trying to turn around. They've got that administrative piece of the puzzle right now. It's building the team, the change in attitude. It might not turn around overnight. They are putting those pieces in to help build towards some success.
Now, some people are arguing that playing this early in June has something to do with it, because clearly Edmonton Oilers were in the Stanley Cup final and were consuming a lot of the media energy and a lot of the personal energy of those who were following that team for that period of time. Football, it'll find its way. One of the discussion points that I heard on the Two and Out podcast was maybe starting the season a little bit later. And I'm not averse to that, but I think the only way you get that accomplished and still keep the Grey Cup playing where it is, you got to eliminate one of the buys in the schedule. You got to take out 2 to 3 weeks with those first. Saskatchewan Roughriders go into Toronto, and if you love football, you just got to love that final minute in Toronto, where the Roughriders, who had dominated the game, suddenly find themselves tied with 23 seconds to go, and Liram Hajrullahu goes to kick the football down the field and hopefully get some overtime. Let's let Dave Thomas of 620 CKRM let you know what happened.
53 seconds to go, and the Argos have tied it at 32. A game that Saskatchewan looked like they were in full control of early on in this second half when they had a 24-10 lead. What a catch in the back of the end zone. Put a star beside that one for Dijon Brissett. And the Toronto Argonauts.
Yeah, the ability to hold on to the football here for Dijon Brissett is what separates him from. Oh, just unbelievable. It's crazy.
So Hajrullahu,
it's all you missed.
Yeah.
You just needed the field goal. You know, this game would be over.
So Hajrullahu back to kick off. Ball on the 30-yard line to tee it. Thomas Bertrand-Houdan and Mario Alford back to return. This one will be taken by Alford right in the middle of the field at his 10. Up to the 20, 25, 30. Has a seam to the 40, 50.
Game over! Let's go!
Alford down the sideline.
Let's
he
go!
will be caught.
Yeah!
Flags. Mario Alford. Touchdown! Riders!
You got the feeling all game that Mario Alford was just pushing and pushing and pushing because he felt like he could break one.
That 99-yard touchdown return on that kickoff by Mario Alford vaulted the Roughriders to the win. Now, it had been set up, this situation, because Brett Lowther, who had seemingly come out of his slump, missed a 33-yard field goal and only got a single out of it. It gave the Riders an 8-point lead, but had he made the field goal, that kickoff return at the very end may have become academic.
We've seen Brett Lowther go through these struggles in the past as well. So far, it seems to be an early season slump, but it hasn't cost them a game yet. And that's the important thing for Brett Lowther, is the team continues to win despite his misses. I'm more concerned for him down the line if and when one of these field goal attempts turns a win into a loss. He'll work his way through it. I have confidence because we've seen it before as well. He'll fix what's going on, but that was a key 33-yard field goal to put the game away, and you've got to make those ones.
Trevor Harris goes 13 of 17 for 234 yards. He throws an interception, but also 2 touchdowns. Tommy Stevens, as we talked about earlier, was out on the field with 6 rushing attempts for 30 yards. And A.J. Ouellette had a good night going back to Toronto, 17 carries for 91 yards. Nick Arbuckle, it seemed like it wasn't until the fourth quarter that he started to get going and actually push the ball down the field. 26 of 33 for 259, 2 touchdowns and an interception. I don't put this game on Nick Arbuckle. I just think that the Argonauts, with their penalties that they took, it just added up. And was that all to do with Kenneth George being injured? Maybe, but there seemed to be more aggravation and frustration building.
Not surprisingly, a slower night rushing the ball for the Argonauts as well. This often happens when you fall behind. It was only 54 yards rushing in total for the Argonauts. Liram Haralahu was a perfect 3 for 3 on his field goals, including a 56-yarder in this one as well. Tempers were flaring, and these two teams will meet again further down the road this season. That might be a can't-miss game if these two continue to have that animosity in battling against each other.
The Argonauts took 6 rough play penalties in that football game. The Roughriders took 7. That's, in each of their cases, is almost the length of a field that you're giving up in penalties with just unnecessary roughness calls. 29 overall, 307 yards of penalties assessed to the two teams. Famously, Ryan Dinwiddie said that there were more penalties than the Argos put up offense. Well, he was maybe a little exaggerating there. The Argos net offense was 283.
You do often see penalties early on in the season as teams try to find their way, but those are more often things like procedures and offsides or situations where players aren't quite ready. This was more than that. This was an angry game. There was face masks. A kicker took an objectionable conduct penalty. There was roughing the passers. There was unnecessary roughness. These are more than those mental mistakes. These are more serious discipline issues.
You've got two coaches that really firmly believe in that. In fact, they were both coaching with the Argonauts not that long ago. They both have sort of that same temperament where, look, you play the game to the whistle, and that's as far as it goes. The Riders last year, of course, led the league in penalties taken. And if this trend starts again, I'm sure that Corey Mace is going to be fuming about it. We don't see it much from the Argonauts about all of these penalties. So, Ryan Dinwiddie runs a tight ship. 0-3, yeah, that may explain part of the reason why the Argonauts were taking more penalties than they were usually doing.
The first game of the Saturday doubleheader on the coldest June 21st on record in Calgary saw the Ottawa Redblacks get their first win of the season, 20-12 over the Calgary Stampeders. This one was cold, windy, wet, and ugly.
It couldn't have been much worse. Now, when you say it's the coldest on record, it's the coldest high temperature. So in other words, that's the lowest the high temperature has ever gotten to at 7 degrees. That is ridiculous. And for players to play in rain in that temperature, that is brutal. They took it on themselves to do what they could with what they had. The Ottawa Redblacks win the game 20-12, and for the third straight year, leave Calgary with a victory.
Bob Dice and his team committed to the run as well. They had 11 carries from quarterback Dustin Crum for 64 yards, 10 carries for 96 by Daniel Adebaboye, and 9 carries for 82 yards by William Stanback. This was a game where throwing the ball wasn't going to be that effective. It's tough to throw the ball in these conditions. The wind, going against the wind, it can knock it down. Going with the wind, it can sail a ball long. They committed to the run, and it worked out well for them.
And the other part of this game that we can't forget is the Calgary Stampeders failed to score touchdowns deep in Ottawa territory. In fact, they gambled third down more than once. 5 turnovers overall. When you have 5 turnovers in a game, and especially when they're on third down gambles, 3 of them, that adds up. And when you're not scoring anything when you get close to the goal line, they could have opted for field goals. They chose to go for it. Dave Dickinson believing that his team has momentum, that they should be able to get it into the end zone, but they were stuffed by the Red Black.
One of the most surprising stats, through 3 games, Vernon Adams Jr. has yet to throw a touchdown pass.
That I don't think anybody could have propped. He is a guy that's a machine when it comes to touchdown passes thrown. That was probably the worst performance out of Vernon Adams that we've seen in a long time. Whether the weather got to him or not, he really struggled. And the frustration for him just seemed to mount. 17 of 32 for 218 and an interception. Dustin Crum on the other side, 9 of 22 for 111. But as you mentioned, they got the running game going, and especially with Daniel Anababoye in that final quarter. One thing I need to point out, William Stanback was out of plays in that fourth quarter. The designated Americans, which are basically the guys that come in for the Canadian after the Canadian plays his first play of the game, the designated American that replaces him gets 25 plays, full stop. Doesn't matter what else happens. You can have up to 3 in a game. The Roughriders had 3 against the Toronto Argonauts. The Red Blacks ran out with William Stanback, and so it was Adababoye who had to carry the load in that fourth quarter.
It was great to see him get some carries. I think Adababoye was a bit underused by the Toronto Argonauts, so good to see him get some meaningful carries and really helped put this game away for the Red Blacks.
Well, he had 2 runs back-to-back that were backbreakers for the Stampeders. And for the Ottawa Red Blacks, they become the first Ontario team to win a football game. That is a ridiculous stat. Did it on the road, and they did it in the West. The best way to put it is it's a quirk of scheduling that Ottawa gets the first win for Ontario.
Final game of the weekend saw the return match where the Winnipeg Blue Bombers went into BC and once again beat the Lions by 2 touchdowns. 27-14 was the final. Jeremiah Mazzoli got the start for the injured Nathan Rourke, and Zach Collaros made his first start of the season.
The only thing that I would say is a weak point in Zach Collaros' game is that he is struggling to get the deep ball far enough down the field. He got picked off for trying a deep route, ended a drive deep in BC territory. But Zach Collaros, otherwise, he was making his reads. He looked nimble out there. The hand didn't seem to bother him. 18 of 25, 179, 2 interceptions, 2 touchdowns. His counterpart, Jeremiah Mazzoli, 25 of 44 for 281, 2 interceptions and a touchdown. But Jeremiah seemed to be under siege in that first half, especially. When he was throwing the ball high. And of course, the Blue Bombers got a very fortunate turn of events when a lateral went awry.
It did. The thing with Zach Collaros that impressed me was the opening drive. They got the ball, marched down the field, and he found Dalton Schoen for a touchdown. It was like they didn't miss a beat for his first game action this season. BC responded. They got the ball. There was only 2 offensive drives in the entire first quarter. Winnipeg took 7 minutes and 28 seconds off the clock, and BC got the ball and took 8 minutes and 9 seconds on their scoring drive. It looked like it was maybe going to be a shootout. Things settled down after that. That Winnipeg defense does not seem to have taken a step back this year. Jamal Parker moving to safety had that key scoop and score on the lateral. Evan Holm had a interception as well. That Winnipeg defense came to play.
They did, and I don't know if you can say it's column A that the BC Lions offense was out of sorts and they didn't look very good at all, or column B that the Blue Bombers defense is just that good. In the last podcast, you were saying small sample size, overreaction. How do we really treat this Blue Bombers defense because they only played the one opponent? One
of the most entertaining plays of the game has to be Winnipeg's fourth quarter touchdown where offensive lineman Tui Ellie lined up as a tight end and in coverage hauled in a Zach Collaros touchdown pass. Often when you see those linemen sneak into plays, they're almost forgotten about. They get across the goal line and nobody's around and they have a catch. Tui Ellie had to work for this one.
You say they sneak in, but they technically don't, because when you're an ineligible number at the end of a line, you have to be a receiver number at the end of the line. And if you don't have somebody there with an eligible number, you have to report. The referee then turns around, tells the defense, this guy's reporting as ineligible. In other words, he can catch a football. So the Lions aren't really duped, but you're right. What you're saying is that they soon lose focus on this because so many times an ineligible is announced and nothing happens.
They often come in as the extra blocker more than anything. When they do declare as eligible, it's so that they can be on the line in that position, but they're not often an offensive threat. This was a 300-plus pounder getting it done.
Just for clarity, any number in the 50s or 60s is ineligible. If you've got that number on your jersey, you cannot catch a football. Otherwise, you could have flag football and everybody gets to catch the ball.
Third down.
For the second time this season, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers kick off the Thursday night game, this time hosting the winless Edmonton Elks. The Bombers are a 9.5-point favorite at home. Did we see enough from Edmonton in that game against Montreal that they can keep this one close?
It all comes down to that start. What does Edmonton do in the first quarter? Because if you get behind against Winnipeg, in Winnipeg, that's a really huge mountain to climb. When that crowd gets into it, it's tough to call signals. It just makes your effort so much more difficult. Can the Elks finish within 9.5? Absolutely. I think that this is a little bit generous to Winnipeg. And the reason why I'm telling you this is now the Elks are going to be, this is their third time of playing together. And things are going to start to now come together. Edmonton is not a bad football team. They just haven't sorted out their assignments yet. And we saw that against the Alouettes where players were wide open on certain calls. Once they get that figured out in film, once they get the practice and guys know what they're supposed to do, I think the Elks are going to challenge the Blue Bombers. Trey Ford, just because of those legs, if he can throw a few out of the pocket and maybe Jordan McSimic also moves him around, I think he's going to threaten that Winnipeg defense.
Winnipeg has won their first 2 games by 2 scores. I don't see anything different this time around. Running back Brady Oliveira will miss his second straight game, and he only played the opening drive of game 1. However, Quentin Cooley and Matthew Peterson have stepped into that running back role admirably at this point, so I don't think they're too concerned about running the ball. Nick Dembski's a little bit banged up. He's going to be a game-time decision. He did get rolled up on his ankle a little bit as well, but I believe the second start for Zach Collaros, he's getting that game at home. There's over 30,000 tickets sold for this one already. They're trending towards a sellout. If Edmonton's going to keep this close, their defensive line needs to step up. They've got 1 sack so far this season, and that needs to improve drastically if they're going to turn this one around. I don't see it so far. I think that the Bombers win this one handily.
I don't argue that the Blue Bombers are going to win this football game, but whether they win by that huge amount, that's another question for me that I cannot get my head wrapped around. Small sample size, they've only played the BC Lions. Nathan Rourke was injured partway through the first game. We saw Jeremiah Mazzoli, who hasn't been part of this equation a long time. In fact, how many games has he played in the last 3 years? Not many. The Lions were hurting. We'll see what the Elks can provide, but I'm going to go against the spread. I'm taking the Elks on this one. Friday night, the Hamilton Tiger Cats stay in the division as they host the Montreal Alouettes. Question marks going into this football game. Number 1, is Davis Alexander going to start for the Alouettes?
That is the question, and that's probably why this game is as close as it is. It's a 2.5-point spread. The Alouettes are favored on the road. We saw what Davis Alexander can do last week. His efficiency was through the roof, and he did not miss by much on his 4 incompletions that he threw in that one. I think the Alouettes keep rolling. It's only a 2.5-point spread. I think the Alouettes continue to roll and win this one by more than a field goal. Hamilton, again, we talk about the defense needing to step up. Bo Levi Mitchell can go toe-to-toe with any quarterback in the league, but the Tiger Cats defense needs to come up with some big stops, and I just don't know if they're ready to do that against the Owls.
You compare the Alouettes defensive line to the Tiger Cats defensive line, it's almost night and day. The Alouettes defensive line are beasts, and the Hamilton Tiger Cats, they've got to get better play. Casey Sales has proven himself. He's great, but they need help for him. I always point back to Willie Jefferson and how much help he got on the other side. He's getting it with James Vaughters right now. All those years he had Jackson Jeffcoat on the opposite side of the line helping him out. He would draw attention away from him. Now, Willie has stepped up and improved his game quite a bit, but having James Vaughters on the other side helps the Blue Bombers. And this is the problem with the Tiger Cats, is that they can focus on Casey Sales. Who else is going to do something for you? That's the biggie. Even if it's McLeod Bethel Thompson, Alouettes should be able to cover this at 2.5.
Saturday night, Mosaic Fields sees the Saskatchewan Roughriders host the BC Lions, the winless Lions and the undefeated Roughriders. Saskatchewan is a 5.5-point favorite at home. The big question mark in this one is what quarterbacks are going to play.
You got that right. Is it going to be Jeremiah Mazzoli again? Is it going to be Chase Bryce? we don't know what the Lions are going to come back with unless it's Nathan Rourke. But an oblique injury, that is usually not a 1 week off and then you're back. And for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, we learn that what they thought was something else has now turned out to be a concussion for Trevor Harris. And he may be doubtful for this football game. So then you put in Jake Mayer, and what do you get from him? He's not as quick in the release. He's not as adept with this offense. The Roughriders could be in tough if that's the case.
It's difficult to set the line in this one because of those unknowns. I'm sure both of the number one quarterbacks are anxious to get back out onto the field. But with the injuries that both of them are facing right now, you can't rush. You need them healthy later on in the season, especially Trevor Harris. You got to make sure he's 100% recovered from concussion protocol to get him back out there, because head injuries are serious and can have long-lasting effects. I do like the Roughriders at home. I think they've got enough weapons. We've seen that Lions offense struggle against Winnipeg back-to-back. Saskatchewan's defensive line is going to come to play as well, and that Lions offensive line needs to improve a lot to give some pass protection and give that Lions quarterback, whoever it is, time to move the ball. I'm taking the Riders minus the 5.5.
I like the Roughriders at home, but it may not be a cover situation if Jake Mayer is starting at quarterback. It's funny to me how they thought that the Calgary Stampeders quarterback room last year was not very good, and yet 2 of the 3 show up in Saskatchewan, and suddenly Saskatchewan's got a great quarterback room. Now, Tommy Stevens, he's putting up numbers that they expect him to do on third down, although he came close a couple times against Toronto of being stuffed. For Jake Mayer, this is going to be the massive litmus test. Was the idea of bringing him over here, reuniting him with Mark Mueller, is it going to work? You're going to find out right now. Your backup has to carry you, and if he doesn't, what do the Roughriders do? On Sunday night, the Toronto Argonauts play in Ottawa against the Red Blacks. The Red Blacks are favored at home by 2.5 points. This comes on mainly the victory that they had in Calgary. But I don't think you should get down on the Argonauts too much. After that fire and brimstone speech that Ryan Dinwiddie had after the loss to Saskatchewan last Friday in Toronto, I don't think these Argos are going to be laying back and just hoping for the best.
It's the third game of the week where there are some questions about starting quarterbacks. Drew Brown continues to recover from injury that he suffered early on this season to his hip. Chad Kelly's getting close to a return, but is he ready to go? It's likely Nick Arbuckle one more week. Ryan Dinwiddie is going to light a fire under this team, and they come out firing on all cylinders. I'm taking the Argonauts on the road to get their first win of the season and to pull into a tie in the standings with the Red Blacks for second place.
I'm with you on that. I think the Argonauts will get their first win of the season. Dustin Crum played well enough in Calgary. He didn't hurt them with what he did out there. The Argos, despite everything, have now started to really get that offense to score more than 20 points a game. The Red Blacks aren't scoring a lot without Drew Brown. And this is the old question, right? Who's going to be the starting quarterback? And does it just speak to the fact that we need the starters to play this game? It's so difficult for betting line aside, but just to know that there's Chad Kelly in the offing, maybe Drew Brown in the offing. What would this be if they were both going?
It's even hard to market when you don't know who it is. And starting quarterbacks across any football league are really the most marketable players generally that you see. And you want to be able to promote that head-to-head of Chad Kelly versus Drew Brown, of Trevor Harris versus Nathan Rourke. And we're just not there right now. As I talked about last week, early on in the season is the time for caution. You want to make sure guys are fully healthy. I don't see a need to rush anybody back yet, but we're getting further on to the season where you need those starters in the lineup to get fans in the stands and to give your team the best chance to win.
It's hard to climb back from 0-4, 1-3. It is just hard. And you're always caught in that dilemma. Well, if I wait another week and then we happen to lose, then what? And how big is that hill to climb? Because you're running out of games to wait. You have to start winning sooner than later. And the Argonauts are finding that out in a heartbeat. that 0-3, and they're staring up at the rest of the division. They've got to get something happening soon. That's why I like the Argos. I think they're a better team than what their record is. Nick Arbuckle out there. They've got to get that running game going. They've got to figure that out. If they can get some help for him, get some more offense out of the running game, the Argos should be able to prevail, especially if Drew Brown isn't starting for the Red Blacks. If Drew Brown starts, all bets are off. This is just going to be a fun game to watch.
It's a East versus East matchups in both games and West versus West in both games this week. These are important in the standings. And if you're Toronto and Ottawa, and Hamilton for that matter, you can't let Montreal get too far ahead. It's already looking like the path to the Grey Cup is going to go through Montreal.
We saw what Toronto did a couple of years ago, where they went 16-2 and ran away with the division. I'm sure the rest of the East is not looking forward to the Alouettes having that same opportunity. If you want to change the narrative, great time to do it is right now.
Third Down Gamble uses the expert resources of the Canadian Football League and 3 Down Nation. For up-to-date, insightful statistics and analysis, please visit cfl.ca and 3downnation.com. The CFL on CBC theme music is used with written permission from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
Thank you for listening to our show. Third Down Gamble is hosted on Podbean. Follow us on Twitter, where our handle is @ThirdDownGamble. Join us again next time. The Third Down Gamble Podcast. Audio worth watching.